Have you ever thought or said, the FAA is not coming after me for flying my drone? Well, that was yesterday, back in the old days. And if you think the FAA is not paying attention to drone pilots, well, think again. In 2026, the FAA strengthened its enforcement policies and made it clear that certain drone violations will no longer be tolerated by simple counseling or education. Instead, they are going to result in certification actions and civil penalties, or both. Today, I'm going to be counting down 10 drone rules and regulations most commonly violated by remote pilots. I'm also going to be reviewing the Code of Federal Regulations behind each rule, and then I'm going to be examining the real-world enforcement cases and testing your knowledge with FAA-style exam questions along the way. Now, you'll also be getting a bonus, a pre-flight checklist that you'll be able to download from my website at mikesites.com. Are you ready for this? This is Series 5 of 7. Let's go. Okay, welcome back everyone. Let me start off by saying that this video is probably one of the most important videos I've ever uploaded. It's seriously real, and so is the FAA. And I want to be real in this video by just talking to you in a way that you can understand. And the information's not just gonna literally fly over your head. So let's go through these 10 broken rules. I'll tell you why the pilots break them. I'll give you some examples of real-world FAA enforcement. And I'm going to tell you what the FAA expects. And then after that, I'm going to give you an FAA Part 107 exam question. So let's start now with rule number 10. I'm counting down. Flying an unregistered drone. And I'm laughing because you know we all do that. We break the rules. And this is a very important part of understanding why the FAA is engaging in this enforcement. So, flying an unregistered drone, this is 14 CFR Part 48. It's not even Part 107. There are many drone pilots right now who assume that the registration of a drone is optional. And the fact of the matter is that it isn't. If your drone requires registration, then you must register it. It must be registered before you actually fly the drone. It doesn't matter. There are no leniencies or anything of that nature. If the drone needs to be registered, it must be registered before you fly it. Let me tell you exactly why it is that pilots make this mistake of flying their drones, not because they're trying to register it, just flying their drones, and why it is that this is such a big mistake. You see, the registration process is a very quick and inexpensive thing. It doesn't even take much to register a drone. Some pilots incorrectly assume that it isn't a priority. But the fact is that all drone registrations are priority. Just like when you register a car, you wouldn't drive your car on the street unregistered because you're going to go get a ticket. They're going to pull you over. So the only time that you need to register a drone is whenever the drone weighs 250 grams or more. Anything under 250 grams does not need to be registered. So understand this. Most drones that you'll get, the drones that you buy, are going to weigh more than 250 grams. So it's more than likely that you're going to have to register the drone. There are only a few drones in the subcompact weight that do not require registration. So even if the drone is weighing less than 250 grams, well, there might be a possibility that you still need to register it because it may fall under certain conditions. We'll talk about that later. So here are two real FAA enforcement examples. One, the FAA imposed an $18,200 civil penalty against a drone operator who flew an unregistered drone during a Miami Grand Prix weekend. There was another with $7,760 against a person who operated an unregistered drone using first-person view, that is, wearing goggles, inside of the Paul Brown Stadium in Cincinnati, Ohio, where the operator flew over a crowd during an NFL game at night. Now, what does the FAA expect of you? They expect that before you fly the drone, that you register it. The second thing is that you take the registration number and you put it on the exterior of the drone. And the third is that you carry that registration paper, that document, or you can have it on your phone actually, but it must be with you at all times during the flight. Now, let me give you an FAA Part 107 exam question. A drone pilot purchases a drone, requiring FAA registration. Before operating the aircraft, the pilot must A. Register only if flying commercially. B. Register the drone according to weight requirements before operating it. C. Register only when operating within controlled airspace. Well, the correct answer is B. Any drone that requires registration must be registered before operation, regardless of where it is being flown. Rule number 9, flying without a remote pilot certificate. Believe it or not, it does happen. This is 14 CFR 107.12 for certified remote pilots. And there is also something in the U.S. Code 44809 for recreational flyers who must pass a trust test and carry proof of completion of that test at all times. You see, this rule is also mentioned in the FAA Circular Advisory, or should I say Advisory Circular 91-57C. It's titled as Recreational UAS Operations Guidance. Now, if you're conducting a non-recreational operation, which is basically a commercial operation, a remote pilot certificate will be required by law. Now, if you're flying recreationally for fun and you have a trust certificate, that is also required by law. Notice how I added by law to both of those scenarios, and that's because it's directly pointing to the statutes of legal requirements. Whether you're flying for fun or whether you're flying commercially, you need to have something in your hand, and that something is a certification. Either you have the FAA Part 107 certification, or you passed a trust test and you have that certificate in your hand. Now, why is it that some pilots make the mistake of flying without a certificate? Well, there are a lot of pilots who actually believe that money needs to exchange hands before a drone flight becomes commercial. That is incorrect. Not true. Commercial means an exchange. Even if it's a favor for someone like your best friend, it's an exchange for something. And that's called a barter exchange. And the FAA knows that the intention here was for you to get something in return, so that automatically makes it a commercial flight. So let me give you an example. Your 90-year-old grandmother bakes a sweet potato pie, and she says, "You can have this pie, honey, if you just take your drone, put it in the air, and take videos of me standing on the roof, jumping and doing backflips." Well, that would be a very cool video, right? But the fact is that you will need an FAA certified remote pilot before you can even capture that footage, because the intent was for an exchange and not simply just to have fun. So, Grandma, here's what you got to do. Pick up that book, start studying for the FAA Part 107 exam. Go to MikeSites.com. There you will find a lot of study guides, tests, quizzes, and a whole bunch of references that you just never knew existed, and you'll be able to pass that FAA Part 107 exam, get your remote pilot certificate, and do as many backflips you want on top of that house. You gotta give it up for grandmas, right? They motivate you to do things that you never thought you could do. Let's move to rule number 8, failing to check the airspace that you're flying in. Now, this one is extremely easy to break, right? Because air is air. You don't know where the boundaries or the layers are, because you have to find those things out before you fly. So it's much easier just to put the drone up in the air, take off, and we're good to go, right? No, you have to know what airspace you're flying in, or you may be breaking a major rule with the FAA. So here's the question. Why is it that most pilots, or people for that matter, break this rule? Well, people often assume that since they don't see any airplanes, they're not close to a major airport, the sky's clear, it's blue, there are no clouds, there aren't a lot of people nearby, so it's safe to fly, or they're in a national park, which surprisingly, most people do not even know that it's restricted airspace to fly in a national park. Or let's say they're at a lake, they're hiking, or they're on top of a mountain. So it's okay to fly my drone. Well, in some cases, they're even away from home, visiting family members in some other state, and they want to impress the family by taking the drone out in the backyard and putting it up in the air, not really thinking about airspace, are they? So I want to give you something right now, something that will benefit you all greatly. And it may even save you some money, a lot of money. And you'll thank me later, I promise you. The first thing that you should be thinking about before that drone even takes off is actually a question. Do I need to get authorization to fly here? That's a reasonable question, don't you think? And the FAA will know if you asked that question for yourself. And do you know why it is that you have to ask that question every single time? It's because the airspace does not have stop signs or markings or caution lights. It's just air. And if you don't know what airspace you're in, well, you're going to be taking a really big chance on breaking a major rule. Now, let me give you some real-world enforcement examples. $36,770 fine for a drone that was flying and interfering with an emergency aircraft. Here's another one, surprisingly, $20,371 for a drone that was being operated in restricted airspace at Mar-a-Lago, the private residence owned by President Donald Trump. Now, who would want to be flying there? I don't know about you, but if I was flying at least 2,000 miles away from the president's property, I would still be terrified because there is no question that they're going to come after you. Now, what does the FAA expect? Before every flight, you need to check your airspace. Determine if you can fly in that airspace legally. Now, the way to do this is simply open an approved FAA app, such as Before You Fly or Airloft Air Control. Enter your flight location and verify whether or not that location is Class G airspace, Class B, Class C, Class D, Class E airspace, whether it's authorized for you to fly there. It's very easy for you to get the app on your phone and you'll be able to check the airspace there. Also, check LANCE for the FAA real-time authorization for any controlled airspace locations. You can also check your NOTAMs, Notice to Air Missions, which provide you with time-sensitive information that can affect flight operations. You can do this simply by going to the FAA website, FAA NOTAM Search, and you'll be able to search the nearest airport identifier for the area of operation. You can search runway closures, airspace restrictions, special events, military operations. There's so much at your disposal that you'll be able to do so that way you don't have to break that rule of flying in airspace without proper authorization and not knowing what airspace you're flying in. So here's a Part 107 question for you. You're at a location where there are very few people nearby and it appears safe to fly your drone. What must you do before taking off? A. Fly, but make sure you're below 400 feet AGL. B. Don't fly until you have a visual observer. Or C. Check the airspace, NOTAMs, and temporary flight restrictions, or TFRs, for any required authorizations before flying. And since you already know the correct answer is C, and that I made mention of a TFR, temporary flight restriction, let's now move to rule number 7, which is flying in a TFR. Now, I already know that most of you are probably going to break this rule somewhere down the road, and that's because most of you do not even know what a TFR actually is. A temporary flight restriction is a restriction issued under strict FAA airspace authorization, and it applies not only to drones but to all aircrafts. Airplanes, helicopters, gliders, hot air balloons, anything that flies, you cannot enter into a TFR. It is completely and utterly restricted. Now, a drone must always comply with a TFR, temporary flight restriction. So here's what the FAA wants you to know about TFRs. Always check stadium TFRs, especially during the Super Bowl. Presidential visits, presidential debates, they will all have TFRs. Emergency disaster areas will have TFRs, VIP movements, large outdoor concerts. And you need to know and be aware of these TFRs because these types of situations, although they are temporary, will get you in the most amount of trouble. Now, the FAA has a TFR map that provides a graphical display of active up-and-coming temporary temporary flight restrictions across the United States. These restrictions can be issued for wildfires, natural disasters, VIP movements, major sporting events, security operations, and other special situations. To access this map, you'll need to visit the FAA website and search for FAA TFR map. I'll have a link in my description that will take you there. Now let's move to rule number 6, flying over people, and this is under 14 CFR Part 107.39, where it states, no person may operate a drone over another human being unless, and we'll get to the unless later, but basically, you cannot fly a drone over people. The question here is, why do most pilots break this rule about flying over people? And it's because people don't know, and they honestly believe that flying a drone over another person, or as they say, over another human being, doesn't have anything to do with breaking the law, and it does. Even some of the most experienced pilots are not aware that you can't fly a drone directly over people, children, grandmothers, bald-headed, green-eyed broskies. You can't do it, and it's not allowed under Part 107 rules and regulations. So the real FAA enforcement here is that the FAA proposed a civil penalty exceeding $20,000 for a drone operation that was flying over people in a public event. So what does the FAA expect? Well, they want you to continuously monitor the area throughout the flight. Make sure that you plan your route beforehand so that way there are no unexpected surprises. You see, usually when people fly drones, they have no idea of what direction the drone will be flying in, and they have absolutely no flight plan. And this is where the unexpected happens. People all of a sudden start coming out of the woodworks, and then it just ruins everything, and your drone is hovering over a crowd of people, and guess what? Here comes the FAA. What you need to do is to plan your route before you fly, just as you would plan a vacation spot or a trip that you're going to. You need to make sure that you have a plan or a route, so that way you know that if the unexpected happens, you have alternatives that you'll be able to handle that situation appropriately, and the FAA won't have to be coming down on you because of the fact that you didn't have any plan to avoid flying over people. Now, here is an FAA example question. A remote pilot notices that people are entering into the operational area during an active flight. What should the pilot do? A, continue flying because the airspace is authorized. B, increase altitude so the drone is higher. Or C, reassign the operation immediately and prioritize the safety of the people below. Well, of course, everybody knows the correct answer is going to be C, right? You have to really understand that flying over people is not always something that's in your control. Sometimes it just come out of nowhere. And you have to understand also that the FAA does not care whether or not you knew those people were coming or not. The only thing that they care about is that that drone, if it is flying over people, you're going to get a fine. And this is one of the most broken rules in the Part 107 rules and regulations. Number 5 is interfering with emergency operations. Emergency operations are activities conducted by government agencies or authorized responders to protect life, property, or public safety during an emergency. Now, some examples of these will include a firefighting aircraft battling wildfires, a police helicopter searching for a suspect or searching for a missing person, a medical helicopter transporting patients, search and rescue operations, a disaster response after a hurricane, after a flood, an earthquake, or a tornado, even an aircraft carrying hazardous material, or a security operation during a major emergency. So why does this matter for drone pilots? Well, a drone can easily collide with a helicopter or an airplane operating at a low altitude during an emergency situation. This can result in a forced landing of the emergency aircraft, and it will delay life-saving operations, and you know how serious this is. So why do drone pilots break this rule and make this critical mistake? It's because wildfires and emergency situations create dramatic footage, so the primary focus is on the footage and not necessarily on the interference of the emergency operation. Simple reason. Now, in regard to the real FAA enforcement, one operator received a proposed penalty exceeding $36,000 for operating near a wildfire response aircraft. These type of things are going to get you in some big trouble, and it's going to break the bank if you're not careful. So what does the FAA expect? What they want you to do is to stay completely clear from emergency response activities. Done and done. Nothing else needs to be said. When you see an emergency situation, don't put your drone up in the air and try to get footage of it. Stay completely clear of it. Now, here's an exam question. Who has priority over a drone operation? A, the emergency response aircraft, B, the drone aircraft, or C, the aircraft which is in the area first? Well, ridiculous question. You know the answer is always going to be A, the emergency aircraft. The emergency aircraft always has priority, and you must yield the right of way to that aircraft or any other aircraft for that matter. But in an emergency situation where you don't want to be, you must yield the right of way to that response aircraft. Number 4, exceeding the 400-foot AGL limit. Under 14 CFR Part 107.51, FAA rules and regulations state you cannot fly above 400 feet AGL. That's above ground level. But you know, and I know, that you've seen those videos where those drones are flying well above 400 feet, right? Commercial pilots or recreational flyers cannot fly above 400 feet. That's the rule. Now, why do pilots break this rule, and why do they make this mistake? The number one reason is because they simply don't know about the 400-foot rule. You see, there are some pilots out there who have not studied for the Part 107 exam, which makes up most of the pilots, and they're simply not aware of the fact that a 400-foot rule even exists. The second reason is because pilots that do know about this rule, they become so focused on the imagery and getting the best footage that they forget about the altitude that they're flying in. They lose their altitude awareness, and they have absolutely no idea that they have exceeded the 400-foot rule. And it's extremely easy to do that and not know exactly how high you are whenever you're flying a drone. The saving grace is that on most drones, you can preset the altitude limit so that the drone will not fly above that. But most pilots do not set their altitude limits, so therefore they're flying well above 400 feet and they don't even know that they're doing that. Now, in the real world, the things that you really need to be concerned about are flight logs. If the FAA decides to pull your flight logs, all of the altitude information is going to be on that. Another thing is remote ID broadcast, where anyone who has a drone scanner can know exactly how high your drone is. This includes law enforcement, it includes FAA inspectors, anyone. It includes your neighbor who's looking at your drone and they're saying, why is this guy flying so high above my house? He's got to be over 400 feet. And they have a little drone scanner, and guess what? They're calling the FAA or someone, and they're saying, can you please get a police officer out here? I'm being spied on, and I think the drone's going to hit my house. You have to be very careful where it is that you're flying. And the 400-foot rule means that you can't go over that. It's very easy for anyone to know how high you're flying because of all of the particulars in regard to remote ID broadcast and drone scanners and all of these other things, flight logs. So what does the FAA expect? Well, they expect you to continuously monitor the altitude of your drone during flight. It's kind of like when you're periodically checking the speedometer of the car when you're driving to make sure that you're not going over the speed limit. That's a very good analogy, because as you're checking the speedometer while you're driving, you're also checking the altitude while you're flying. So let me give you a very simple exam question. The maximum altitude under Part 107 rules and regulations is A, 300 feet AGL, B, 400 feet AGL, C, 500 feet AGL. I don't need to tell you anything else because we've been talking about 400 feet throughout this whole section, and you know that the maximum altitude that you can fly that drone is 400 feet AGL. Let's move to rule number 3. And this has to do with flying beyond visual line of sight. It falls under 14 CFR Part 107.31. FAA rules and regulations say that you must keep the drone in visual line of sight at all times. Now, why do pilots break this rule? Well, it's very simple. It's because most people believe that keeping the drone in sight is the same exact thing as watching it on the display of the remote control, and that's not what the FAA means. What they mean is that you must use your own two eyes to track the drone and observe its position in relation to everything else that's around it during the flight. So, what does the FAA expect? They expect the pilot or the visual observer to constantly keep track of that drone with their own two eyes throughout the entire operation. Now, if you're flying a drone and wearing goggles, then you're not complying with FAA rules and regulations, because the FAA says that your eyes must be used, and first-person view, or FPV, is what they mean when they say that, is using the goggles to track the drone's position is not complying with FAA rules and regulations, so you need another person standing with you who is actively watching the drone while your face and your eyeballs are in those goggles watching the drone and having that experience. You need someone else there to physically keep eyes on the drone and track its position. Number 2, flying your drone at night without the required lighting. This is 14 CFR Part 107.29. When you fly at night, you need to have anti-collision lights, and those anti-collision lights must be visible for 3 statute miles. Now, why do pilots make the mistake of flying a drone at night without putting the adequate lighting on it? Well, it's because they assume that the lights that already come on the drone, the factory lighting, already meet anti-collision light requirements, and that's not the case. Those lights are not visible up to 3 statute miles, so you have to purchase anti-collision lights so you can strap them onto the drone, and then those anti-collision lights, once the drone is up in the air, will be visible to other approaching aircrafts, and this is what the FAA means, so that way you can meet the safety requirements. So those lights are mandated. It's required that you must have those lights if you're flying at night. Here is a real FAA enforcement case. A drone operator in Wesley Chapel, Florida, flew at night without anti-collision lights, without a remote pilot certificate above 400 feet AGL, with improper registration on the drone, and it nearly hit a law enforcement helicopter searching for a burglary suspect. Now, you can't get any better than that. As a result, the FAA imposed a $32,700 civil penalty against the operator of that drone. So what does the FAA expect? Use anti-collision lighting visible for up to 3 statute miles whenever you're flying at night. It's that simple. So here is a simple FAA question for you. Night operations generally require anti-collision lighting visible for A, 1 mile, B, 2 miles, or C, 3 statute miles. The correct answer, as you already know, is C, 3 statute miles. Let's now take it to the final rule, rule number 1, which is the rule that is not specified in the Code of Federal Regulations, and that is believing that the FAA does not enforce drone regulations. So why do pilots make the mistake of believing that the FAA won't enforce these rules? It's because many pilots assume that the FAA is only focused on airlines and manned aircrafts, and there's no way that they would come after a drone operator because it's just a drone. It's not hurting anyone and not breaking any laws. There's nothing that is more false than that statement. The FAA is real, and the reality of this is that you all know the FAA has proposed substantial civil penalties, as I've gone over, certification suspensions and certificate revocations against drone operators. In 2026, the FAA strengthened enforcement guidance and accelerated their legal enforcement to certain drone violations. It's important that you understand that the FAA is not going to be nice about violations anymore. No more smacks on the wrist, no more educational requests, and no more second chances. The old school days are gone, and now you need to take flying very, very seriously. I put together a 10-step pre-flight enforcement checklist. It's in my video description. It will help you. Remember this, the FAA does not expect perfection. What they expect is preparation. Most drone violations don't happen because pilots intentionally break the rules. They happen because pilots skip a simple pre-flight site? Check. If you're preparing for the Part 107 exam, go to my website. There's links in the description. And if you'd like to subscribe to get more of the updates on my videos, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. And until then, I will see you all on the next video.